So there was this Jewish man who was disgusted with his faith and one day decided to leave the Jewish world altogether. And he decided of all things and all places to go in the world to join a monastery. And joining a monastery, one of the conditions is that you take a vow of silence, and so this man did indeed take a vow of silence, but there was a condition of the monastery that every 7 years, the members would be allowed to come before the elders and share two words before them. So the first 7 years pass. The man comes before the elders. The elders ask him for his 2 words, and he says, cold floors. Another 7 years pass in total silence. And it comes the time for the man to present himself before the elders once again, and they ask him for his 2 words, and he simply says, lousy food, and he mumbles. Still another 7 years have gone by, and the man is brought before the elders once again. This time, with resolute conviction, the man says, I quit. We're not surprised, said the elders. You've done nothing but complain since you've been here. You see, we Jews have an aversion to silence, don't we? At best, our silence is productive. We meditate and contemplate on the proper action and proper intention that we may yet take. But often our silence is an attempt to formulate a plan rather than to listen and respond to the thoughts of another. You see, we Jews have a patience deficiency. We have, as has been said, a problem that when others talk, we don't listen, we wait. Jews have an aversion to silence for sure. So here's another joke. 27 rabbis go to a convent. Okay, it's not a joke. It really happened to me this summer, and we were hardly silent because I and 27 of my colleagues from all around the world were given the opportunity to go to the Beit Jamal convent, which is just outside of the city of Beit Shemesh in Israel this past summer. Our goal there was complicated, for sure. We were there to experience how the sisters encounter prayer, and we were there to compare their expressions of faith with our own. Our visit was filled with the understanding that we were to discover what best understands ourselves as seekers of God's presence, and to learn with respect what distinguishes us. So we learned there that the sisters have this amazing practice of silence for the week. They do actually converse on Sunday afternoons during meals and walks that they take together. Thank God. But we, my colleagues and I, sat in astonishment as we heard that the sisters wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to begin their daily prayers in silence. There was a lot to share of what brings us together and separates us, indeed, the sisters and the rabbis. But we learned the sisters believe that the silence isn't an act of submission or it isn't some subjugation to an all-powerful God. Silence for them is the entry point into divine service. Their faith is found in their silence. Jews have a different relationship with silence altogether. The difference between the rabbis and the sisters was not found in our tolerance for the decibel levels of sound. We learned that our difference is in how we relate to the silence. For the sisters, silence is a tool of connection. And for us rabbis, silence is active. It's why we turn into our tradition and hear the words of Shimon ben Gamliel, who taught, "All my days I grew up among the sages, and I did not find anything good for the body but for silence." The study of Torah is not what is essential, but rather action. And whoever increases words, says Rabbi Gamliel, brings sin. For Jews, silence without action is impotence. We fear a moment of silence may bring us to the brink of oblivion. Silence for Jews feels like a weakness. It's a sense of powerlessness, and it's a sense of submission that we cannot tolerate. There are many moments this year alone where we saw Jews speaking out with full voices, expressing grand measures of moral responsibility and empowerment. Take this past summer, for example. Jewish voices collectively spoke as Dr. Judea and Ruth Pearl bestowed the 14th annual Daniel Pearl Award upon Charlie Hebdo, the satirical French magazine that was brutally attacked by extremists earlier this year. Antonio Fischetti was there to receive the award at the Los Angeles Press Club this past August. But it was on that fateful morning in January when Fischetti was excused from work that day because he had to attend his aunt's funeral. So amidst the gathering of extended family and close friends who shared loving thoughts and words of comfort to his family, 2 men stormed Fischetti's workplace and killed 12 of his co-workers. Reports of the awards this summer related the palpable, tangible affection and honor given to him, Fischetti, and to the magazine for its bold tenacity and commitment to continue publication even despite its tragic circumstances. It was a tremendous honor for the magazine, for sure. And in the words of one journalist, it is an honor we should all wish would never have to be given. This story comes even closer to us here at Valley Beth Shalom, as Judea and Ruth Pearl courageously stood here on this bima and inaugurated their awards here in honor of their son Daniel, who was killed by Pakistani extremists in 2002. And even still, our Jewish voices trembled when only 2 days following that horrific attack at Charlie Hebdo, the hyper-kasher kosher supermarket in the suburbs of Paris was attacked by other Islamic extremists, taking the lives of 4. There was a profoundly healing response from the global outpouring of the Jewish community, from the French citizens, and from the world. But the reverberations of doubt and uncertainty for Jewish safety lingered for months. These events suggest there's a thing called Jewish power. And Jewish power today is best expressed by our ability to mobilize the loudest and largest voices in response to our perceived attacks. The more support we have for us, the more we can combat the voices of extremism and maligned protest. It's even the power that the Prime Minister of Israel expressed to the Jews of Paris in response to those attacks in January. He said, "You have a home here in Israel because we are powerful there." What words then shall we speak of this Jewish power? In the wake of the attacks in France, the short-lived anthem, "Je suis Charlie," I am Charlie, became a temporary salve for the wounded conscience of our global society. By all of us showing our solidarity with the writers and artists of the magazine, notorious for publishing some of the most salacious and primitive human behaviors under the guise of offering commentary to the French elite. We identified, when we said "Je suis Charlie," with the values of free speech and of expression. We celebrated these noble truths our modern societies protect. And in our particular community, we even heard our own VBS members proclaim, "Je suis Juif." I am a Jew. It was in solidarity with the French people and with Jewish communities worldwide this past year when they said, "I am a Jew," proudly. I am Jewish. Those were the words reportedly last spoken by Daniel Pearl before he was murdered. Je suis Juif. I'm a Jew. I am Jewish. More than a statement of identity, it is the voice given to the numbing silence we feel when we are powerless. Certainly, my own "I am Jewish" identity was pummeled this past year, not only hearing about these stories in France, but also the ones that came from Copenhagen, from the suburbs of Maryland, even here in the San Fernando Valley, as story after story of anti-Semitic vandalism and attacks racked the Jewish world. When one of us is vulnerable, we are conditioned to shudder with pain. We are compelled to correct the injustice we feel because we feel violated, we feel threatened, we feel weakened, and still, we may even yet feel powerless. We portrayed in those words, "I am Jewish," the image of the broken Jew, the emaciated, cowardly, fearful, weakened Jew, led off to slaughter. It's not so subtly underneath the surface here. And so we restrain ourselves. And our restraint is contained with ferocious animosity. We Jews would like to say in these moments, "We'd like to destroy you. We'd like to prevent you from harming us, but we can't because it's not the moral thing to do." And so "I am Jewish" sometimes means we are unwillingly forced into silence. Shall Jewish power then mean that we can walk the world with a clenched fist and punch any bully who threatens our safety and security? Does our power now entitle us to deter anyone from causing us harm? And the reason that we don't is simply because we choose not to. Conversely, does Jewish powerlessness mean we are subjected to our weakness and our subjugation, even to the point of enslavement? We've said never again, and we meant it, to any form of powerlessness. But living in a never again reality means our powerless selves will never be bent to the subject of another's will. And never again will mean that we proudly stand and confidently shake our fists in the face of political and spiritual and personal adversities. And in an act of our power, we will throw down our fists and we will grit our teeth and we will shout, "Never again." But we hold our clenched fists as each time the news splashes the screen and again happens over and over and over. We really hope never again. And it's in our cacophony and shouts and screams that this tension exists. There is tension among us. We have power, and we are afraid of the power we contain. We are afraid of the powerlessness that has afflicted us before. It's no doubt that this tension between power and powerlessness is what animated a man named Dr. Baruch Goldstein, who you may have heard of before, who lived in the city of Hebron in Israel, who just over 20 years ago stormed the cave of Machpelah, the burial place of our spiritual ancestors Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, and took the lives of 29 worshipers and wounded 125 others before he himself was killed by those attempting to protect themselves against his attack. Goldstein was a founding member of the Jewish Defense League, an organization founded with pride to protect and to exert Jewish power in the world. He was an active settler of the city of Hebron, and it was his response to this relentless antagonism by the other Muslim residents of the city for him to stand up and take this power into his own hands. And so he dressed in an Israeli military uniform. He armed himself with an arsenal of guns and weapons, and he entered into the cave of Machpelah as nearly 500 other worshipers, Muslim worshipers, were coming into that prayer space on that day to pay their respects to our shared spiritual ancestor, Avraham Avinu. The whole world repudiated his attack. His name lives in infamy in the world around us. There's even a website. There's a website for mass murderers. You wonder how I stumbled onto that. I wonder myself too. But he's right there, because if you type in Baruch Goldstein, that's where you'll find him. Because the world repudiated his attack. And what's true is the impact of his exercise of power still lingers in that place even today. I visited the cave of Machpelah this summer. Much to the concern of my wife, and now that I stand here safely with you, you should have been concerned as well. I could not have felt more uneasy in that space. There is such a thing as desecrated ground. And it was there, in the heart of our homeland, in Hebron, that I heard the words of God shouting out to Cain, "The blood of your brother cries out to me." Nothing could have been more surreal in that moment than the man who was our host taking us through the Machpelah caves stood underneath the olive trees outside of the complex. And he responded to our questions there regarding Goldstein's morality and our experience, the odd experience of that place in that day, a place that was meant to be holy, but was so tense and difficult. In the blazing heat, we listened and seethed as this man spoke of Goldstein with a sense of awe and honor for his courageous acts. Because there are those who made a shrine out of his burial place. The disparity of the olive tree of peace and the persistence in this man's deeply held belief that power expressed in violence is justified was simply numbing to witness. This was not the emblem of power that we were meant to take from us on that day. And you know this, we've learned this all before. The moment our voices are raised to the point of a scream, we lose our power. It's more than among friends or among family members when we get angry, or parents to our children when that does indeed happen from time to time. Our screams as a Jewish people with power now have global implications. Goldstein's memory will stand among the rarefied few in Western societies who crossed the lines of power and powerlessness and broke the moral fulcrum between the two. Such actions are the supreme manifestations of powerlessness. But in the minds of the perpetrators, these actions are an expression of ultimate power. The deafening silence in Hebron, even to this day, speaks a different message. Power, wielded with the sword of annihilation, is not power. It's a violent expression of fear. And this is not the power that we have been entrusted to share with the world as Jews. For Jews, you see, the prevailing definitions of power and powerlessness are wrong. Power and powerlessness, indeed, are moral categories. They must become for us an inspiration. They must motivate our actions and not be the thrust of our reactions. Powerlessness in this balance is not weakness. Powerlessness is the willful restraint of our power. One more story from Hebron. As our bulletproof bus drove through the city streets, my eyes caught a little boy, no more than 8 years old, standing in a courtyard with a rock in his hand. In an instant, I saw the boy's older brother run from behind him and take that rock and swat it out of his hands. I don't know if it was a game. I assume the worst for those who know the stories that come out of Hebron, that rock may have indeed been intended for us. But we learned something. We learned something from this, that preventing violence is a courageous act to put the stone down and begin the dialogue. Jews, I feel like I'm chastising. Jews should not throw rocks. And any parent has told that to their children before. We can learn this from a little Palestinian boy. But it's a lesson that all of us need to hear and learn from and respond to today. So what is Jewish power? Jewish power, then, is the personal and collective expression of moral responsibility. It is to speak for the voiceless among us, and it is to inspire goodness in ourselves and in others. That is Jewish power. Responsible Jewish power begins with ourselves, begins with you. So we'll hear the words of the 19th century Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Satanov, who taught, "Be silent before you open your mouth and reflect. Ask yourself, what benefit will my words, will my speech bring to others and to myself?" Several years ago, Rabbi Schulweis, our teacher, a beloved, sweet teacher, whose words we miss on this holiday, whose voice is physically absent, but we hear coursing through the words I share now. He was asked to contribute to this book called I Am Jewish, which was a compilation of memoirs in honor of Daniel Pearl. He shared the observation made by the words that we read today here on Rosh Hashanah. On the first day, we read the story about Ishmael and Hagar, and on the second day today, we read the story about Abraham and Yitzchak. So there he writes, both Ishmael and Yitzchak are God's children, and their genealogies are both recorded in scriptures. We learn the compassion of God is not restricted to one people. The Jewish tradition, then, properly understood, will not allow God to be segregated. The Rabbi teaches us here that when power is used inappropriately, our source of power is isolated. Raising our voices to speak with Jewish power, then, should bring us closer to infinite truth, to the blessings of godliness. Power in any other form, he teaches us, is selfish. When the pain and torment of losing our friends and loved ones as victims of terror is unrestrained, there is sordid justification in exacting punishment upon the perpetrators as a morally courageous act. Unmitigated power reaches into the depths of our moral fiber. It challenges those ideas which ought to permeate the best of ourselves. Power unrestrained, however, leaves a moral stain written in indelible ink upon our conscience. It's why we hate hearing and reading about the group called Tag Mahir, the Jewish extremist group who goes into Palestinian neighborhoods, sets fire to homes, and murders small children. This is not Jewish power. This is fear, and it's not Jewish. Our definition of responsible Jewish power, then, must be one that brings God together. To say, as I ask you all to say, I am Jewish, is to unify the human being. It's to bring conflict and our segregated selves into the whole presence of God. Responsible Jewish power is like the words that we just spoke of earlier, by hearing, by listening to the kol demama daka, the still small voice. It takes heed of our collective wisdom. When our sages teach, Ezahu Gibor, who is a powerful person? HaKovesh et Yitzro, the one who conquers his impulse. We model ourselves as ones with Jewish power who recognize that we don't have to use force in order to protect our relevance. The mark of courageous power, then, is to turn inward and to speak with moral authority. So here is the equation, a very simple equation for responsible Jewish power. The broader you define yourself in the definition of the collective, the more that you can speak of power in the voice of the collective, the more power you possess. And I am Jewish is the shorthand for this moral theorem. It is Jewish power, which we learn conquers the self, so the voice of the collective may be heard. We are a community concerned with Jewish power in this way. And each and every expression of our identity is bound up with this sacred restraint. In other words, this exercise of power is dependent upon your voice and upon your support, because we need your voice when our community speaks out about the crisis of refugees fleeing Syria or Eritrea or Sudan. We need your voice when our community will speak out to inspire vigorous debate regarding the security and existential threats to Israel and to the Jewish people all around the world, we'll need your voice. When our community pours out concern for the neglected in our societies, the ill, the forgotten, the homeless, the rejected ones, we'll need your voice. When our community speaks out and with pride is given audience and is heard by the leaders and the pillars of our leadership in this country to support responsible diplomacy with the nations of the world, it's your voice that lends to that collective. And it will be your voice and our collective voice that challenges again and again the albatrosses which afflict our societies from injustice and neglect. We need your voices, and we need your hands. We need you to say with pride that you are Jewish. I am Jewish. And it's my prayer on this holiday that when you speak and you tell others in the world around you that you are Jewish, there are words that speak of a Jewish power that you will be proud of. There's no doubt we live in a world of tension. There's no doubt that there are calls to respond with vigorous voices of power in every which direction. My prayer for all of us is when we listen inside, before we speak and reflect, when we say with pride, I am Jewish, that the voice that comes out is that voice of moral responsibility. It's that voice that responds to the voiceless in the world. It's the voice that brings goodness to the self and to others. So may it be on this holiday. And for all of us, Shana Tova.